Speaker, I move amendment number 1 on sheet C 2025-226A. Mr. Speaker, this amendment concerns the objects of the Act, which is a critical section of the legislation and reflects the intention of this government's reform. We have heard from members tonight that it is not the intention to erode environmental controls or the role of the RFS, for instance, in preventing developments in bushfire areas, and the Minister has obviously just reiterated that in his reply. But the legislation must speak for itself, and when it comes to this bill's amendments to the objects of the Act, it is clear that erosion of environmental considerations will not be unintended but may be by design. The current Environmental Planning and Assessment Act includes terms that this bill seeks to amend and remove, including terms such as to better the environment, to have proper management and conservation of our natural resources, and the subject of my amendment, which is to, and the emphasis is mine, to protect the environment, including the conservation of threatened and other species of native animals and plants, ecological communities and their habitats. However, under this bill, the government seeks to amend this object by creating a similar but vastly different section 1.3D, severely narrowing the environmental protection intentions. The bill proposes not to protect all native species and their habitats, but only conservation of threatened species of native animals and plants and ecological communities and their habitats. It narrows the object from protection of the environment, which is a broad protection and one that extends to biodiversity and all its flora and fauna of native species, but only threatened species and their habitats. The amendment I am moving seeks to reinstate this object and restore the existing object of the legislation and its broadness. Without this amendment, a habitat would only be worthy of protection under the objects of the Act if the habitat was a threatened species. This change is radical and unacceptable and cannot be considered a modernisation of the objects of this bill. Because eroding environmental protections does not reflect community expectation nor Australia's international 30-30 target commitment to protect and conserve 30% of Australia's landmass and 30% of Australians' marine areas by 2030. Mr. Speaker, whilst it is a terrible reality that in New South Wales we have over 1,000 threatened species and 78 already declared extinct, we will have many more if we are not taking active steps to protect those that aren't threatened as well. Finally, I would just like to highlight the New South Wales Biodiversity Outlook Report 2024, which shows that biodiversity is on decline in New South Wales. It highlights habitat loss as the key pressure on biodiversity across the state. Several key findings include only 50% of threatened species that are expected to survive in the next 100 years and 29% of the capacity of habitat to support native species remains. I'm very cognizant that the objects of the Act set up parameters for all developments in New South Wales, whether that's a huge housing development or a small one, or a wind farm or a coal mine. We must seek to protect all native biodiversity in consideration and interpretation of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. I did share the serious concerns of the EDO that we were witnessing retrograde steps, but this amendment will seek to reinstate the environmental protections under the Act and prevent unintended environmental consequences.
Thank you. The question is the amendment as moved